Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review for The Bad Batch Season 2 Episode 5. And we got what appears to be another one-off episode. Again, what are we doing with the actual Bad Batch as characters? These episodes, these sort of, quote-unquote filler episodes, will be a little bit more acceptable if there was more of a concrete idea about what we were doing with these characters. Yes, other shows, the Clone Wars, had episodes where it didn't feature too much of the main characters and we were doing something a little bit random. But you always knew just from the trajectory of that show focusing on the Clone Wars that we would get back to doing something more interesting. The problem here is that we're just waiting for them to decide what the Bad Batch is actually going to be doing. And just in the meantime, we are doing what seems like completely random things. Where we just started off two-part episode about effectively just a random mission that had a nice reference with Sereno. The last episode was just a weird kind of pseudo pod racing thing. And now we get a ancient treasure hunt episode, and it was fun. But again, I've explained multiple times why I think saying an episode of a show that I'm inclined to like as a Star Wars fan, saying it's fun is not particularly high praise, because that should sort of be like the standard, you should enjoy it because you watch it. The problem is it didn't do anything more than that necessarily, and especially with them going for this kind of treasure hunt episode style thing, it felt like, why don't you make this into a bit of a plot? If you have multiple episodes of the Bad Batch not being up to much, why not actually turn this into a proper investigation of whatever this like ancient civilization is with this high technology? But no, this felt like a complete one-off episode that, yeah, we're just leaving the giant mecha beast thing out there, and that's what it is. Like, are we going to return to this episode? They seem to basically confirm that, like, it can't be activated again, so are we ever going to come back to it? I don't really know or necessarily, like, see the point or why we do that. So this episode ended up, I think, just being about, like, what our relatively new kind of pirate treasure hunter character, Phee, who we just met. And even her, I don't feel like they said all that much about her. It's the same level of, like, character depth that they're giving to, like, Sid, where it's just like, hey, this character who works in or around sort of shady stuff, their life is basically doing that stuff. Like, Sid used to scam people, basically, and now Phee is a full-on pirate treasure hunter. Like, you can sort of see the idea there. Like, she was enjoyable in this episode, to drive the plot forward, to allow this kind of event to actually happen. But again, this is where I wish they would actually just commit, if they're doing an episode like this, to having it be an actual lore reveal episode. Instead, it felt like it was just, we need an ancient thing, someone quickly throw something together. Like, here's the rough name of, like, a system, but we're not really going to try and connect it to anything. Just uninhabited planet, we go into the mountain. Look, here's the heart of the mountain. We take it out, the machine activates, we put it back, the machine deactivates. And we get some action and hijinks along the way. And that's really about it. There's a bit of puzzle solving as we go through it. There was definitely a little bit of a, Jedi Fallen Order here, which made me kind of think, like, is this connected to, I think the ancient species in that game was the Zepho, which had the kind of puzzle type stuff, but they never, in this episode, moved to make any sort of reveal. And that's what makes it feel very fillery, is that you come out of this not really knowing much about what we actually just experienced beyond just what the characters experienced. Like, no one took away any particular learning about, like, what was the nature of this civilization, why did this all exist in this case. And sure, there are situations where it's like, let the sort of almost like environmental storytelling tell you what's going on here. But I just don't think they presented enough information, like, at all, beyond to just prompt, like, base speculation. And that's the kind of thing of, like, are you meant to care about what this is, or was this literally just meant to fill in an episode slot? Because we have, what, 16 episodes in the season with this show, and I would say so far that at the very least this episode and the previous one probably weren't necessarily needed as such. I'd almost argue that the first 2 episodes you probably didn't have to do them in that exact way. But I sort of accept with The Bad Batch as a show that you are going to have episodes like that are more of just, you know, the Bad Batch doing their action on a mission. The problem is I think we're doing that a little bit too much, and we still have no clear-cut direction about where they're going as characters. Like, again, that stuff from the first 2 episodes of what Echo said, like, are we just basically protecting Omega, or are we actually trying to do something to stop the Empire? It's very unclear if we're trying to do anything just yet. And you can say, like, oh, we're only 5 episodes in. But my argument is that, like, I'd say most people would have the situation where, like, if a show isn't grabbing you by, like, episode 3 or so, there shouldn't really be a caveat to watch something and to keep your interest that you have to watch until, like, 10 episodes in or something like that. Especially with this being a season 2, you think they should have learned a little bit more from season 1 and what makes this show good, yet they're still doing this. That's what I don't understand. That, like, this, I suppose, company fundamentally, like, especially on the animation side of things, can do, you know, Tales of the Jedi and have a very limited run number of episodes that you're desperate for them to do more. But then they have this other show where you're like, why does this have 16 episodes in a season? Now, maybe they'll suddenly turn the plot on and the show will just go from strength to strength. We'll start to do more with Crosshairs and on the Empire side of things with the clones, and we'll get the Bad Batch actually doing stuff, maybe connecting up with some rebel cells and stuff like that. We know we're going to meet a Jedi at some point in the season based on the trailer. But when's that going to happen? That's what the show needs really, really badly right now. Because I don't want to just hate on this episode because I enjoyed it to a certain extent. But I think just the placement in the season so far has been quite poor. Just how anyone, I think, on the show's production or whatever, organizing things, felt that going from that amazing episode 3 with Crosshairs to what we got last week, and then to follow that up with what we got here, is just all over the place. Like, I guess it's highlighting that the group is completely doing, you know, absolutely random things. But you need to get the plot going. Like, the show is named fundamentally after the cast that was basically in this episode. When are we going to actually do something with them? That's the problem. The show, I feel, has basically lost nearly all of its momentum from season 1, which shouldn't usually be the case. Like, yes, you usually have to set up the plot of the second season, but it felt like we've just completely gone down to zero and are trying to get started again instead of, you know, launching in a decent spot. So I hope they get back on track without it taking like the entire season, because there were weak spots in the first season where I think it took getting to some of those later episodes for it to take off. That, again, the show probably doesn't need 16 episode seasons, but let's see what happens. Is there anything more to say specifically about this episode? Like, the design on the giant mecha beast thing at the end, I thought was actually really cool. It's something different. I don't think I'd ever really seen anything like it in Star Wars. It certainly, when it rose up and just the power that it seemed to have, it gave that impression of, like, you know, I'd say the only thing that probably matches it is maybe like the Zillo Beast in terms of, like, the sheer scale and raw power that, like, how do you stop this thing without some sort of like gimmicky kind of approach. That's the I did like that aspect, but it didn't have anywhere near, I think, the appeal of the Zilla Beast episode, just because it was on a planet that was already abandoned, not abandoned, but basically eradicated, which, from context, you have to assume the last time that this thing was activated, it basically destroyed the entire planet. That's why no one lives on it. But why is that a significant thing to reveal to us when you don't seem to actually want to, like, tell us much about what's going on here? That's again the issue here, is that I want to know more, but it doesn't seem like the show has any ambition to actually, like, have this episode be anything significant, sort of like in the lore department. That, in my mind, like when you say it's like pre-Jedi, like it's an ancient kind of culture or whatever, that's interesting to a hardcore Star Wars fan, but they don't seem to care about that aspect of this episode. It was just, let's just do fun puzzles and big boss battle type thing at the end, and not that the information about how, what, when, where, why doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things with the episode. That's the frustration here. Because I would say ultimately you had no real character arc. Like, sure, there was a little bit of like, oh, is Fi gonna like lean into her avarice and like take the heart, and everyone will get killed or something like that. But that was never going to happen. So they just had the quick arc of like, she gives it up, she cares about the safety of the team more than taking this crystal with her, and they eventually solve the thing. Otherwise, like, the only like character thing in the episode was, again, Omega being inquisitive, clever, Hunter being the one opposed to a lot of this sort of like hijinks happening, and it's just very base character development. When the thing you can do with episodes like this, that, for instance, say like Avatar: The Last Airbender, what it does with its quote-unquote, you know, fillery type episodes, where they're more one-off, not directly about the plot, is that you can focus in on specific characters and actually have character development for characters who, maybe when the main plot is going, won't get focused. Like, for instance, when we're into all this stuff, maybe with Rebellion and stuff like that, I'm assuming the characters who will take the lead in that are going to be Hunter and Echo, probably. So the likes of maybe, like, say, Wrecker, and maybe even Tech to a certain extent, maybe won't be as involved in some of that decision making when we get there. So why not have something much more significant happen with those characters in an episode like this? That's the kind of thing I'm trying to do. But it's becoming more and more clear they don't really seem to have character arcs specifically for the members of this team based on what we've seen so far. And that's why Crosshairs is so much more of an interesting character, having separated from the team. And it's almost like, even though you kind of want to eventually maybe see Crosshairs rejoin the team, do you want that to happen? Because will he just go back to being another member of the team? He's just a sniper guy in the team, and suddenly all that was interesting about him is lost. This is why it is so important to actually start the plot with the Bad Batch sooner rather than later, because it's beginning to, I think, become this problem where the group basically being attached to Sid is really holding the show back. But now it's almost feeling like, just once the Bad Batch are involved in an episode, you're kind of like, are they actually going to do anything or not in the episode? That's the kind of fear that the show is kind of falling into. And I think from some of the comments I've seen about this episode, some people have viewed this episode as being a little bit of the last straw, that they're kind of done watching it, at the very least, week to week, until there's some clear evidence that the show is going to improve. And that's not a good situation, I think, to be in. That I think you had people with the return of this show with season 2, and outside of, I think, so far one episode and maybe some references from the two-parter with Sereno, you've not done a lot to keep people invested in this show that they were super invested in at the end of season 1. So I hope they improve going forward. Like, episode 6 is up next, and then we're very close to the middle of the season. I think you need to get going on stuff now. Whether that be a return to Crosshairs, who, you know, you can't, I think, wait too long to come back to him, or just doing something with your main characters. You need to get something going here. But like I said, overall, it's a solid episode. It's just timed pretty poorly, I think, in terms of what we need and then versus what we actually got. The episode itself, I think, didn't lean enough, I think, into the gimmick of it being ancient and addressing some history. I think they could have actually come out of this with some reveals, because, you know, a lot of that stuff could be quite confusing and vague and stuff like that. So why further that? Like, why not just actually give some concrete information that's like, hey, this is actually somewhat important. Like, this and some other material is going to delve into this ancient culture. The Bad Batch just touched on it, like, first. Or it is actually connected to other stuff. Like, if it was connected to, like, Fallen Order and the Zepho, that's interesting to me. Like, is that what we were going for? But they didn't tell us. So, I don't know what to make of that. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this episode. But that's been what I had to say. That's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.